All right, let's dive into one of the most intense family dramas you'll ever come across. We're talking about Isaac, his twin sons Jacob and Esau, and a divine promise that gets all tangled up in ambition and betrayal. It's a wild ride. Let's get into it.
So, here's the big question that really drives this whole story. What happens when a divine promise, this huge, sacred destiny, crashes right into a super dysfunctional family? We're about to see how God's plan deals with the messy, human reality of jealousy, lies, and, parents playing favorites. It's a collision course, for sure.
Okay, so to really get a grip on this feud, you have to start with the dad, Isaac. And look, he's not just some random guy. He's the promised son, the one his parents waited a lifetime for. He's the heir to this world-changing promise God made to his father Abraham. And you really have to let these numbers sink in for a second. Abraham was 100 years old. Sarah was 90. I mean, come on. Isaac's birth was anything but normal. It was a straight-up miracle. It was God's way of putting a giant exclamation point on the story, basically saying, hey, this family line, it's special. And it's going to depend on me, not on what's normal.
And then God makes it totally official. He doesn't just send a memo. He shows up personally to Isaac and lays it all out again. He repeats the exact same promises he gave to Abraham. You'll have this land, your family will be huge, and the whole world will be blessed through you. So boom, the torch has officially been passed. Isaac is now the guy, the crucial link in the chain.
All right, let's jump forward to the next generation. Isaac gets married, and you're going to see a pattern here. Just like with his own parents, there's a long, frustrating wait for kids. And this wait leads to a pretty dramatic prophecy. A prophecy that's going to shape not just this family, but really the course of history.
So yeah, just like his mom Sarah, Isaac's wife Rebekah can't have children. And this goes on for 20 years. 20! It's that same theme popping up all over again, right? It's hammering home the point that the special family line can only continue if God steps in. So finally, Isaac prays, and it works. Rebekah conceives. And not just one baby, but twins.
But this is not a calm, peaceful pregnancy, not at all. The kids are literally wrestling inside her womb. So Rebekah asks God, what is going on? And the answer she gets is a total bombshell. Remember, in their world, the firstborn son gets everything, the power, the inheritance, the whole deal. But God completely flips the script. He says the older twin, Esau, will end up serving the younger one, Jacob. This one prophecy sets the stage for every bit of conflict that's about to unfold. And the parents? Oh, they do not help things at all. They each pick a favorite. Isaac, he loves Esau, the tough, outdoorsy son who brings him fresh game to eat. But Rebekah, her favorite is Jacob. This favoritism just splits the family right down the middle. It turns their home into two rival camps and basically paves the road for the huge betrayal that's coming. It's just a classic textbook recipe for disaster. And here's where everything just boils over. Isaac is old now, he can't see very well, and he decides it's time. Time to give the big patriarchal blessing. But here's the thing. He's got his own agenda, and it flies directly in the face of what God had already said was going to happen. Now, Isaac knows the prophecy. He knows what God said. But he loves Esau more, so he decides he's just going to ignore it. He tells Esau, go hunt some game, make me that meal I love, and the plan is to give him the firstborn blessing anyway. Think about that. He is actively trying to overrule God's plan. But Rebekah overhears this whole conversation, and she immediately cooks up this incredibly detailed scheme. She tells her favorite, Jacob, okay, here's what we're going to do. He's going to pretend to be his hairy older brother. How? By putting goat skins on his arms and neck to fool their blind old father. It's a crazy, high-stakes con, and after a little hesitation, Jacob agrees to do it. And it works. The scheme actually works. Isaac, completely fooled, gives Jacob the blessing. And this isn't just a hope you have a nice life kind of blessing. It's irrevocable. It's a blessing of power, of prosperity, of being the Lord over his own family. Jacob has just stolen his brother's entire future. The fallout from this is instant, and it is catastrophic. Esau gets back, the whole trick comes out, and Isaac starts trembling violently. He realizes what he's done. Esau just lets out this gut-wrenching, bitter cry, just pure rage and grief. And right there, he makes a vow. The second our dad is dead, I'm going to murder my brother Jacob. The family is just shattered, completely broken. So now, Jacob, the great deceiver, is a fugitive. He is literally running for his life. But it's right here, on this desperate escape, when he's at his absolute rock bottom, that something truly incredible happens. He's all alone, on the run, and he falls asleep using a rock for a pillow. And he has this powerful dream about a stairway or a ladder connecting earth to heaven. And it's in this place, which he later names Bethel, meaning house of God, that God himself shows up. And you'd think it would be to condemn him, right? But no, God shows up to confirm the promise.
I mean, just look at what God says to him. It's the whole package, the full Abrahamic covenant, spoken again directly to Jacob, the liar, the schemer. This is so important because it shows us that God's promise doesn't depend on Jacob being a good guy. It's not about his merit. It's about God's unstoppable purpose. God even throws in a personal guarantee to watch over him wherever he goes.
So Jacob makes it to his uncle Laban's place, and there he falls head over heels for his cousin Rachel. He agrees to work for 7 years to marry her, but then, in this amazing twist of poetic justice, his wedding night arrives, and his uncle Laban pulls a switcheroo. He tricks Jacob into marrying his other daughter, Leah. The great deceiver wakes up married to the wrong woman. I mean, talk about getting a taste of your own medicine.
So, okay, we've had all this family drama, all these lies, and all this divine intervention. What are we supposed to take away from all this? What's the big picture here?
Well, this is really the central point of the whole story. Think about it. Isaac tried to go against God's will. Rebekah and Jacob used sinful deception to try and force God's will. And yet, through all of that mess, what happened? God's original plan, that the older son would serve the younger, is exactly what came to pass. It shows that God's purpose moves forward not because of these flawed people, but in spite of them.
So when you boil it all down, the takeaways are pretty clear. First, God's big promises often need his direct intervention to happen. Second, playing favorites with your kids is, well, it's just a recipe for disaster. Third, lying and deception always have painful consequences. But maybe the biggest takeaway of all is this. God can and does accomplish his perfect will even when he's working with deeply flawed people, like Jacob.
So Jacob got what he wanted. He stole the blessing, and then God himself confirmed it. But he's not on top of the world. He's a broken man, a fugitive, and he's paid a huge price for his choices. And that leaves us with this one big, lingering question. Jacob the deceiver is now carrying this massive divine promise. So, what kind of man is he going to become?